Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. We actually have to stay here because if we don't, then the students who are watching the live stream can't see us. Usually I like to wander around and talk to people more closely. So I'm Janine Harrison. I'm the academic coordinator for field education in social work. I have academic oversight for all of the field education topics in social work. And I will hand over to my lovely colleague over here to introduce himself.
Hello everyone, I'm Luke Robins, not Luke Roberts, who's one of our other topic coordinators for social work. I am part of the Work Integrated Learning Support team, so we handle the administrative side of placements, including compliance and contacting agencies to find your placements and a number of other things, and you'll have plenty of contact from us over the next 6 to 9 months. And Kim's over here as well, but you can't see her on the screen, unfortunately. Kim was also part of our team.
Yeah. All right. So I know that there's some familiar faces here of students who actually started in first semester this year in the Masters. So welcome back. And the rest of you are all brand new. Is anyone here from the Bachelor's program? Yes, okay, welcome. So you would already have had your welcome sessions with the course coordinators in the Bachelor's and the Masters, right? So hopefully you've got all of the information you need about enrollments and your study plans and so on. So the focus of what we're going to be doing is field placements in social work. We'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Kaurna people and we pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. And in social work, we think it's really important, some of us, to acknowledge that the land has never been ceded, that this is and always will be Aboriginal land, and we need to acknowledge and respect that. We'll tell you more about that in some of your topics. So you already know about the dates for O Week, that this is the first week, and then next week you've got Connect Week, which gives you opportunities hopefully to connect with some of the other students in your courses and to meet some more of the staff members. Excuse me, I'm recovering from flu, which I'm not infectious with anymore, so my voice is a bit funny. So we've already introduced ourselves. You're welcome to contact us via email if you have any urgent questions following on from this. But we also would like to encourage you to ask questions in the session. So we'll do a presentation first. We'll run through the sort of typical things that people want to know about field placement. And then at the end, we'll give you opportunities to ask questions. And for those of you who are watching the live streaming, hi as well. And you're welcome to post your questions to Luke in the chat on Events Air. Okay, so what is field education? It's a core component of Australian social work courses, all of them. It's also an international requirement. For any social work program to be accredited internationally, it has to meet particular requirements around field placement, which includes 1,000 hours across 2 field placements. It's learning in a workplace environment in human services, so an actual practice setting where you get to work with service participants or clients or communities, whatever you would like to call them, depending on the nature of your particular placement. Gives you the opportunity to transfer your classroom learning into a field placement context in a sort of real world practice situation. You learn under the supervision of a qualified social worker. Some of you would have a social worker on site, on placement. Others would have another kind of human service professional supervising your day-to-day activities on placement, and then also have an external social work supervisor. So that's also very normal, not only at Flinders, but also at other universities in Australia and overseas. You also get the opportunity to develop your professional identity as an emerging social worker. And to start looking at the values and skills and knowledge that social workers need when they're working with service participants. There are varied practice methods in social work field placement, so you might be working with individual clients, you might be doing group work, community development, research, project work, policy development, policy analysis, organizational development, advocacy, activist work. There's a whole range of different methods of practice that you might engage with on placement. The requirements for field placements are set by the Australian Association of Social Workers, which is our professional accreditation body. They updated their standards in November 2021. So if you want to see the most up-to-date standards, you can Google Australian Association of Social Workers and have a look at the accreditation standards, and that gives you more detailed information about what's required. We will be telling you a little bit about that today as well. Okay, so I'm going to keep going, and you hold your questions for us till the end. So bombarding you with lots of information. So some of the things that you need to know about field education and placements. So first of all, you have to all do 2 placements. Those of you who do have experience in a human services type role for a minimum of 3 full-time years, you may be eligible to apply for recognition of prior learning for your first field placement. If you think that might be relevant to you, have a look at the Flinders website under recognition of prior learning, and it gives you much more information about the ASW requirements regarding recognition of prior learning. And then if you think you're eligible, you could apply through the college, the College of Education, Psychology and Social Work. If you're not eligible for RPL, which most people aren't, you have to do your 2 field placements. Each of them is 500 hours. So a 500-hour placement is about 70 days if you're doing it 7.5 hours per day, which is the sort of typical amount of time that people spend. That takes about 18 weeks. That's longer than a semester. So it's really important for you to be aware of just how much time it takes to do 500 hours of placement. So for example, those of you who are doing your placements in semester 2, which I know some of you are, you're starting the end of July, and you can expect to finish around the end of November, beginning of December, depending on how many hours you're doing per day. And if you're doing the standard 4 days per week, and I'll tell you more about that shortly. Excuse me. So your first placement in the Master of Social Work is done in your 2nd semester of study. So those of you who have just started the semester, you'll be doing your first placement in 2nd semester. Our bachelor's students over here, you do your first placement in your fifth semester. So you do your first 2 years of topics first, and then you do your first placement in your 3rd year of study, and you do your final placement in your 4th year of study. Master's students do your final placement in your 2nd year of the Masters. So as you know from Luke, the placements are coordinated by the Work Integrated Learning team. So there's quite a big Work Integrated Learning team, but Luke here and Kim are primarily involved in the social work placements. So they're the people at the other end of the phone when you start getting to the actual coordination of your placements. And that includes all the pre-placement stuff like compliance. What else, Luke?
Yeah, all that stuff. Different information about you for your placement, whether you have a car, driver's license, any experience that you have as well, like Janine mentioned in human services, all that sort of thing comes sort of through us and then goes towards your placement, and then we work out where you're going, and then you go to an interview and off you go on placement. It's pretty much that simple.
Yep, thank you. And we will tell you more about that in a moment, so don't panic yet. Often a lot of panic comes up around field placements, so I'm sure that some of you have burning questions. Just hold on to them, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk through all of them by the end of this session. Where was our placements? Do you have to meet the ASW accreditation requirements? So we, on our side, are responsible for making sure that placements do meet the ASW accreditation requirements. Even if in the beginning of your placement you're unsure about some aspects of what you're going to be doing on placement, don't worry, don't panic. It's part of our role to help to define and clarify anything that's perhaps looking like it's not fitting well with the ASW requirements. And that's sometimes true with new placements. We go through a process of identifying with the agency what the learning opportunities are going to be, but then sometimes once a student starts a placement, because it's still very new, there's a bit of a negotiation process that happens, and that's normal. So don't worry if you end up on placement in a new agency. It's part of our role to help you to work out what exactly you're going to be doing and how it fits with the requirements for placement. So it is an advantage for you to have a driver's license and access to a car, but it's not a requirement. So if you don't have access to a car and you don't have a driver's license, don't panic. There are options, but it is, if you have just started and it's feasible for you to try and get a car, if you already have a license, then it is in your interests because it just makes your life a little bit easier and it gives the wheel team some more options to refer to you. That's okay. Right, compulsory pre-placement requirements. And I'll get Kim or Luke to add to any of these that you would like to. So because we're working with vulnerable people as social workers, there are all kinds of requirements, first of all, around criminal history. So all students have to have national police clearances, including interstate students. If you have something on your criminal record, you're welcome to contact me directly to have a confidential discussion about that, what it might mean for your placement. It's possible for students to be placed even if they do have a criminal record. It does depend on what the nature of the record is. If there's anything on someone's record that has to do with abuse of children or vulnerable people, there's no way that they can be placed. So that's probably the most important cutoff that you need to be aware of. And there are obvious reasons for that, I'm sure you can imagine. In South Australia, there are 3 Department of Human Services police clearances that you need to get. So it's child-related, aged care, and vulnerable persons. Luke and Kim tell you more about that via email in the early stages of the pre-placement process. You also need to do child safe environments training, which is the training that you do that tells you about your responsibilities as a student social worker regarding child abuse and neglect, because we mandated reporters as social workers, which means that if we ever see situations where children are at risk of harm, we have a responsibility to report, and we need to know what our responsibilities are. So you get training about that. You also have to do COVID hand hygiene training. That's just across the board for all people who got any kind of placement at Flinders. Vaccinations are relevant for, at the moment, COVID vaccinations are a requirement for all placements. And then in some placements, there are additional requirements around vaccination. So some agencies will require a flu vaccination. That's mainly aged care and disability. And then SA Health, which is like hospital placements and healthcare, they require a whole lot of other additional vaccinations. So closer to the time, you'll get more information about the vaccination requirements. If anybody isn't vaccinated and isn't eligible for, what do you call it? Exemption, thank you. Isn't eligible for exemption, again, you can have a discussion with us about what that's going to mean in terms of placement options for you. We think that agencies are going to start rolling back vaccination mandates, but we can't guarantee that. And we can't dictate to agencies what their requirements are regarding vaccinations and other policies. Anything you want to add to that?
No, that captures most of it. There are, for those of you who are watching from interstate potentially, there's a few other different things you need to do depending on what state you're in. And also you don't have to worry about the South Australian student checks as well. So those will all be communicated to you as the process sort of evolves. And depending on where you're placed as well, like Janine said, some places require a flu vaccination, some don't. It's very much each case is, sort of different sometimes depending on the agency. So we'll cross that bridge when we get to it once you're all matched up.
Yeah. Thanks, Luke. I forgot to mention there are students who are probably listening from interstate. So we have students on placement all over Australia from all of the different states and territories, and we probably will have in semester 2 and semester 1 next year as well. Okay, so very important dates. So you absolutely have to meet all of these deadlines before you can go on placement. So that's probably the most important message we need to leave you with today. You won't have information about this yet, so don't worry, you haven't missed anything. But it's really, really, really important, first of all, to look out for an email from the Wheel team, that's Kim and Luke, which we think will be about early September, telling you what you need to do in order to register your intention to do a placement in first semester next year. So it's a 2-minute survey, very, very quick, that you do online. And then once you've done that, you've registered your intention to do a placement, there are follow-up processes that happen from that. So the first one is that you put information onto InPlace, which is the university's field placement data management system. And that's where you put information about yourself, like driver's license, background, experiences, volunteer work, undergraduate degree, areas of interest, and so on. And Luke and Kim use that information to match students to placements in South Australia. Works a bit differently for interstate students. But the InPlace information is really, really important so that Luke and Kim can actually match you to placements that fit with your, so the agency requirements as well as, your particular situation and circumstances. The final deadline, we think, for compulsory compliance documents will be the 1st of December, and that's where you have to upload your criminal history checks, your DHS clearances or interstate equivalent, your child safe environments training certificate, your hand hygiene certificate, your, what am I missing? Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about that, Luke?
No, I would just say that as Janine said, this is the most important thing to remember is please don't miss the survey, because if you miss the survey, you miss every bit of communication afterwards, and we don't add you on InPlace, you can't give us your information, and we can't put you on a placement. So that's just emphasise that again. It's literally the most important thing of the whole process. So that 2nd of September date, make sure you write it down, make it the wallpaper on your phone if you need to.
Absolutely. And we will nag you to death about it, won't we? You'll get emails from Kim and Luke, many emails. The course coordinators will remind you on the course coordination flow sites. You'll be hearing about it in class. You'll be tired of hearing about this, won't you, Urja? Victoria? Arthur? You'll be really tired of hearing about this by the time you actually have to meet the deadlines. So we won't only just tell you once, but it's really, really important that you make note of those deadlines, because you really can't go on placement without going through those processes. All right. So, got that message? Yeah. Timeframes and attendance. So for semester 1 next year, which is when some of you will be due to do your placements, some of you will take a bit longer than that. It will be more like 2024, 25 maybe even. So if you're doing it in first semester next year, the placement start date does vary depending on the agency, but typically you can expect to start in mid to late February next year. So it's a good idea if you're planning to go away to start thinking about how your holiday plans fit not only around the placement start date, but also your availability for interviews, because you can expect to start hearing information from Luke and Kim about placement matches from November, December, and you need to be available to attend a placement interview once you've got information about that.
Yeah, and importantly as well, placement interviews are almost always in person as well.
Yeah.
So I know a lot of students might travel for Christmas, so it's important to make sure that you've either had your interview already or you have your time organised afterwards, because they need to be done in person, and that interview period is quite a fluid time. It depends on what agency you're matched with when that interview will be.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really tricky. We wish that we could be more definitive with you and say, be available on such and such a date for an interview, but it's not possible, because it depends on the availability of the staff in the agency that you match to, when people are on leave and all kinds of things. So placement attendance, like I said earlier, is expected to be 4 days per week. That's the sort of typical placement attendance. So for the master's students, it's Monday to Thursday, and you do classes on Fridays. For the bachelor students, you do classes on Mondays, and your placement is Tuesday to Friday. There are some exceptions to that. For example, if you have a university access plan because you have a medical condition or disability, you are eligible to do fewer days. You can have a confidential discussion with a topic coordinator about your particular needs related to your disability or medical condition, so that first of all, in the matching process, that gets taken into account, but also that we make sure that your needs around your access plan are accommodated when you go on placement. So you can attend placement less than 4 days a week. It's strongly recommended that you try not to reduce your placement attendance, just because the fewer days you do per week, the longer your placement takes. So if you do 3 days per week, it takes 6 months. If you do 2 days per week, it takes 9 months. It's a pregnancy. And it goes on forever. So if you were doing 2 days a week and you did it in first semester next year, you'd still be on placement into second semester, which means that you're trying to juggle placement alongside your other semester 2 topics. So it's really, really in your interest to try and do 4 days a week, unless it's just not possible for you for whatever reason. Reckon that's anything you want to add to that? Yep. All right, so essential skills or qualities for success on placement. And for those of you who are brand new in the bachelor's or the master's, it's also worth thinking about what we're going to tell you now in comparison with what you thought about what social work was going to be like, and also what you might have heard from people who are trying to market social work to you as a potential degree, because it's really important that you know what you're getting yourself into. The vast majority of people go on placement and are successful. Occasionally, we do have students who go on placement who probably shouldn't have started studying social work, because social work, not because of anything that's wrong with them, social work is probably not the best choice for them. And that sometimes manifests in field placement. You can do okay with your other topics, but then find once you go on placement that you struggle with things like the professional values and ethics of social work. They might just not fit with who you are as a person. So things like, if you have strong feelings of prejudice, social work's probably not a good fit for you. It doesn't fit well in social work for people to be racist, xenophobic, homophobic, transphobic, and all of those areas of prejudice, because we're dealing with really vulnerable people when we're working with people. And things like that do manifest on placement, and that's where people do sometimes struggle. You might also find that for those of you who unfortunately have had really difficult experiences in your own lives, you might have been through difficult trauma, for example, placement sometimes is the place where you find that there are triggers for you because of the nature of the placement. And some people find once that happens that it really is difficult for them to manage the emotional impact of working with people in a particular placement environment. So just think about things like that in relation to who you are as a person, your background, and whether you feel like this really is the choice that feels like it's the right choice for you career-wise. We also find on placement, and again, I want to emphasize, the vast majority of students who go on placement are successful, they manage really well, they have a good experience on on placement. So I'm talking about a minority of students who struggle for various reasons. The kinds of things that really help you to be successful on placement are openness to learning. So if you're a bit rigid, if you are coming in and saying the only people I ever want to work with are children between the ages of 5 and 10, I'm not interested in adults, I'm not interested in teenagers, I'm not interested in domestic violence. You've got such a long list of things you're not interested in that it narrows it down so much there's nothing left. That could make it really difficult for you to have a good experience on placement. Confidence is really important. So it's okay if you're an introvert, because many people are. I'm certainly, I'm quite introverted in terms of personality. That's okay, but it's really important that you do feel confident engaging with people and that you're able to kind of put your best foot forward when you're working with people and have some level of confidence with that, because otherwise, again, you're going to struggle on placement. Your ability to engage with people, so demonstrating warmth, empathy, genuineness, and so on, really important. Excellent communication and interpersonal skills, including confidence with English language, if English is not your first language. And we completely do understand that for those of you for whom English is a second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth language, it's much, much more challenging. And we do have students, I've seen many, many successful students over the years where English is their fifth or sixth language, not even their second language. But there does need to be a reasonable level of confidence with your English language ability. Another important thing on placement is your ability to deal with conflicts, aggression, confrontation. You won't all have to deal with aggressive clients, but it's very common in social work practice that you have to deal with people who are yelling at you, swearing at you, being aggressive or, kind of in your face. And it's really important that you feel confident in being able to deal with situations like that, because that's just the reality of the kind of practice we have as social workers, more so in some fields of practice than others. Ability to accept people and avoid judgment. So again, not being prejudiced, because you're going to deal with a wide range of people on placement. Resilience is really important, because studying is stressful enough, and then when you go on placement, you add the additional stresses that go with having to be in a human services agency and deal with clients. So your self-care is really important, and part of your self-care is making sure that you've got space to, work on your resilience and manage the emotional impact of the work that you're doing on placement, because you're also sometimes faced with very challenging and emotional situations on placement as a social work student, and something can be really, really confronting. And you go home and you're still feeling, stressed about things that you've heard about or witnessed on placement. Time management and reliability are really, really important. In fact, I'd probably say this is one of the areas where students are most likely to fail a placement, is an inability to demonstrate professionalism and accountability, because that's one of the things that you assessed on. So it is really important that you can manage your time, You can pitch up when you're supposed to pitch up on placement, leave when you're supposed to leave, be present, follow agency policies and requirements and that sort of thing. And again, the vast majority of students manage that really well, but there are always a few slackers every semester who struggle, who don't want to, can't get to placement on time, don't communicate with supervisors in an accountable way, and so on. Okay, moving on. You still with me? All right, so common questions. We'll go through these first, and I think we're almost at the point where we're going to open it up for you to ask your questions of us. So can I organise my own placement? In the Adelaide context, which includes outer Adelaide, like Victor Harbour, Gawler, Murray Bridge, the answer is no. You can't organise your own placement. There are lots and lots of reasons for that. I'll just mention a few of them. One of them is that agencies hate it because Adelaide's a very small city. There are 2 social work programs in Adelaide, plus there are lots and lots of other programs where students have to do placements. And these poor agencies deal with sometimes hundreds of contacts from students who want to do a placement with them. And it's just easier for them to manage if that's negotiated through the university rather than students contacting them directly. One of the other reasons has to do with equity. It's really unfair for international students who don't have a network in Adelaide and for students who come from interstate and then come and start studying in Adelaide who don't have an established network here because they're at a huge disadvantage, as you can imagine, when they're trying to organise a placement, when they're people who've grown up here know schools and, Adelaide's a very, very small network. And if people are well networked, they do have a huge advantage, which is not their fault, but it's just not fair on the people who don't have that network. We also have to consider agency requirements. So agencies have specific requirements. And part of the matching process that Luke and Kim go through is to make sure when they're looking at students for a particular agency, that the students they're looking at meet the requirements for that agency. So that might have to do with a particular area of experience, might have to do with whether or not they have a driver's license, how many days a week they're available to attend placement, all kinds of things that you might not know about in the background. What days do I do placement? I think we've already covered that. Monday to Friday for the masters and Tuesday to Friday for the bachelors. Can I go on placement overseas? At the moment, no, but we probably are again next year, once COVID hopefully settles down again, have some options for students to do placements overseas, because we have had that before, but COVID's really put a spoke in the wheel in a lot of respects. Can you have previous work in human services counted? So like I was saying earlier, if you have significant experience in human services in a role that's similar to what a social worker would do, so that's a minimum of 3 years full-time equivalent experience, you may be eligible for recognition of prior learning for your first placement, which means you get credit for the whole of your first placement. And like I say, if you want further information about that, you can Google it on the university website, and there are information sheets about recognition of prior learning. Can I do my placement in my current workplace? If you are already working in a human services organisation, in some sort of role that's at least a little bit similar to what a social worker might do, it's possible that that can be negotiated to be a work-based placement. So you continue working there, but there's certain aspects of your role that would have to be different in order for you to meet the professional accreditation requirements to do your placement in that setting. So again, that's something that's managed through the WIL team, and one of our colleagues assesses the work-based placement applications. So if you want more information about that, you can email SW Placements, and they can send you the information sheets with more information about that. Is that okay? I think that's, yeah, let's go to your questions now. So, anything else that we haven't covered that anybody would like to ask? So how are we going to do this so that we might just repeat the questions for the people who are listening? Yeah, you can shout out.
So, thank you. I have a number of questions. So, the first one is I wonder whether the student choose their own placement or is it assigned by or supervisor, for example, like working in certain group or
So, yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
go one by one or should I go on?
Let's get to that. We'll answer each one first. So the question is about whether students can choose their own placement. So the answer is no. So in a nutshell, when you do your final placement, you do have a little bit more say in terms of areas of interest. So the wheel team will ask you when you do your information on in-place to identify your three main areas of interest.
Yeah, 3 of about 15 areas that you might find a social worker working in. These are things like education or working with domestic violence, healthcare, mental health, that sort of thing. You have the opportunity to nominate up to 3 areas.
Yeah.
Now, they're not a guarantee, but we will do our best still to try and facilitate you having a placement in one of those 3 areas. It's very rare we get all 3 just because that's just how things sort of shape up, but we do our best to try and have everyone in an opportunity that they're passionate about. It's not a guarantee, but we do our best to try and facilitate that.
Yeah. But at the moment, for first placement, it's not taken into account. It's possible that might change, but for now, for first placement, you need to be willing to go wherever you're matched to a placement. And I just want to give a little bit of reassurance in that respect as well. In fact, I've got quite a few really good examples from this first semester this year of students who I worked with who were on placement who were so annoyed initially that they were put into a residential aged care placement, quite a few of them, and complained about it bitterly for weeks, and then started their placements. And I've actually just recently done the end of placement assessment with those students, and they loved their placements, and they now feel really quite embarrassed about how much of a fuss they made about being put into an aged care placement because they thought that they would not be interested in that field because they made all kinds of assumptions about what it was going to be like. And I do think one of the things is you don't really know what a field of practice is going to be like until you're in it. So people think sometimes, they've got their heart set on a particular agency because they think it's their dream placement, and then they go there and they hate it, and vice versa, where people, have a very specific idea about where they want to go, and find they put in a placement that they didn't think they were going to like, and then the reality is that it ends up being a really good experience. There certainly are people who don't enjoy their placements, but I would say the vast majority talk at the end positively about the learning experiences that they had on placement. So it's really good to be open to learning. So does that answer your question? Yes, okay.
My second question is, in what placement we are expected to work with a certain group and with a certain organization
Yes,
for the whole placement, right?
yes,
Not moving to the next one.
yes. So you do your whole, I'll just answer that for the students who are listening. You do your whole placement in one agency, the 500 hours, that's correct, yes.
And the second placement, you have opportunity to work with another kind of group, right? Not
Yes. Yes, so that's one of the professional accreditation requirements, that your placements have to be different. There has to be diversity across the 2 placements, so you can't do your final placement in the same field of practice as your first placement. You should have a diversity of learning opportunities, yeah.
So coming to the third question, I actually have another one, but I will wait for other.
Okay, it's like, ask your third question, yeah?
So, what if I claim for credit transfer for the first placement? Can I start the second placement earlier, or I have to wait till
It depends on your study plan. So the question is about whether you can start your final placement earlier once you've successfully completed your first placement. There are some accreditation requirements around that. So one of them at the moment is that the ASW says you have to have your 2 placements in 2 different years. So usually you can't bring your final placement forward to an earlier semester, but it depends on your circumstances. So for example, if someone has failed their first placement and has to repeat it, they may have to end up doing back-to-back placements so that they're still doing their placements within the period of their study plan. So it does sort of depend on your circumstances. Yeah. RPL. Yeah, so if you are successful in applying for recognition of prior learning for your first placement and you get credit for it, you have to complete all the prerequisite topics before you're eligible to do your final placement. So you can't go straight into your final placement until you've done those prerequisite topics. Yeah. Yeah. If you've got an international driving license, that's okay if you've got your own car. But if you don't have your own car, the international driver's license doesn't allow you to drive an agency car because of insurance requirements. So an international driver's license doesn't really help you unless you have your own car. Because if you're driving an agency car, you have to have an Australian driver's license. Yeah. Okay. So we got a question here?
Yeah, we've got a question coming in online. It's about criminal history checks. So the question is, do I need to provide the history from my hometown or country, or is just the Australian one fine? So for compliance, we require a nationally coordinated criminal history check, which is just a fancy way of saying an Australian criminal history check. So even if you've been here for your whole life or for 1 month, it's still the Australian nationally coordinated criminal history check. So if, for example, you've come from New Zealand and you've lived there your whole life, you still need to do the Australian one. And we'll provide you with all of the different links and resources you need to be able to do that in preparation for your placement. So there's no need to worry about any other different types. We'll tell you exactly where you need to go.
Yeah, so that's a really smooth process once it gets started. So you don't have to worry about any of that until the WHEEL team actually starts the process for you. And like Luke says, if you come from overseas, when you apply for your National Criminal History Check, it's automatically including your history from your country of origin, because that's part of your visa requirements when you come here. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's a couple more from online. Daniel, it must be an interstate student. Do we get a choice of placement location in a different state, or does he need to come back to South Australia to do his placement? And also, is there any other support available for interstate students? As part of the pre-placement process for interstate students, we encourage interstate students to find their own placements, very different to students in Adelaide. And if that's particularly difficult because the student might not have any existing network, we will offer support, but we do encourage interstate students to try and branch out and build their network wherever they do live. And they have the choice. You can stay in the state you're in. If you're in Sydney, you can do it in New South Wales. Or if you wish to come to Adelaide, you just need to let us know and we can match you as part of the rest of the Adelaide cohort for matching.
And just to add to that, hi Daniel, online, we do have some partnerships with interstate agencies in most of the main cities. And if it's relevant, then, if the student in question lives close enough to where one of the partnerships is, then sometimes we can just organise for them to go straight into one of those. Yep.
And also one from Kerry, how will this work if you are working? So bit of a tricky one because obviously you need to be able to support yourself. If, for example, you're independent and you have to pay rent, all those sort of things, it is worth noting though that as a student, the priority is still your studies. So, being able to negotiate your placement down to 2 days a week because you have to work for 4 days a week probably usually doesn't work in your experience, Janine. So it's a tricky one because everyone's circumstances are very different. But it would just be really worthwhile maybe having a look at your own personal situation and how you can best manage giving yourself the best opportunity to succeed on your placement, and then support yourself, I guess, after that.
Yeah.
So it's a very tricky one. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on it.
It is really tricky, and we really feel for students trying to juggle their need to earn an income with their studies. And we know that there's students who are doing literally between placement and their work 7 days a week, which is really not good for your well-being. But unfortunately, it's not possible for work-related reasons to do a placement less than 3 days a week. So it's probably good to try and organise now how you're going to manage your work commitments alongside your placement commitments when you do that topic. Tricky one. Anything else?
I mean, a pretty general one, which people always want to know is, will placement be near where I live? So Kerry's asked that as well. The guidelines, the university's policy is that we can place you up to 2 hours from where you live. Now, we don't try and do that. We try and keep it to around 30 minutes to 45 minutes at most. Sometimes you might live in a particularly remote area of Adelaide where there's no access to public transport, and we just have to do the best we can. On the other side of that, it's very unlikely that you'll be placed next door to the residential aged care building that you live next to. We generally will like to share the burden of travel across the cohort. So that means that, we're not having someone travel 45 minutes and then the person they sit next to today travelling 3 minutes. We like to keep it all at about 20 to 30 minutes as best we can. The longer the process goes, though, the closer we get towards the end of the placement matching, that can sort of drift around. But we do our best to keep it to about 20 to 30 minutes where possible, from everyone's home, no matter where you live and no matter who you are.
Yeah, but it is really complicated. So I don't do anything related to placement matching anymore, but I used to a long time ago. And if you can imagine there being almost 500 students going on placement per semester, and then look at the geography of Adelaide. Adelaide is a very long sort of city that's spread out from the Fleurieu Peninsula to up north around Gawler. And the public transport's not great here compared to some of the bigger cities. So for those of you who don't drive and are relying on public transport, it can be quite tricky depending on where you live. So if you live in the north, you're at an advantage because there are not many students in the north and there are a lot of placements. If you live in the inner south, close to the university, it's more tricky because there are lots of students who live very near the university, but not as many placement options around that area. And like Luke says, if we, for example, have got a student who lives at Plympton and one who lives at Happy Valley, and we've got one placement down at Aldinga and one at, Hallett Cove. We're not going to take the student who lives at Plympton and make them go to Aldinga, which is 2 hours, when the student who's at, Happy Valley, is closer to...
it's very, very, very complicated.
Yeah, much more complicated than that. It's because it's never just two students you're looking at. It's, you've got a whole bunch of students you're looking at together.
There's a few other questions online, but the online session finishes in about a minute. So for those of you who are watching at home, feel free to send those questions through to swplacements@flinders.edu.au, and we will be able to get that one there. We'll be able to answer any of those questions that you've got. We might even put some of the frequent questions on the Flow site, which is SWFEP_ on Flow, so we can have them all answered for everyone rather than just individuals, but I'm sure we can answer some more questions for everyone here still, if you have any.
Does anybody in the room still have any other questions you want to ask? Yes. Yeah, if it's for this year, it's okay because the ASW has a temporary exception to their placement requirements because of COVID. But if it's next year that it's going to be back to back, then it would be better for you to send me an email because there are some circumstances in which we can approve back-to-back placements, but it depends on the circumstances. Yeah. Semester 1 next year, yeah. That's because that's 2 different calendar years, so that's okay. Yeah. Yes.
The two placements should be in two different fields.
Yes.
But sometimes it might end up working with similar communities. Is that possible?
There's got to be enough variation across your 2 placements. So, Victoria, do you have an example of what you mean by a similar community?
Working with children at a school,
Yeah.
but then in the second placement, they're working with children who are experiencing domestic violence.
Yeah. So that's possible, yeah. As long as it's not that you only have a very small number of children within a specific age group and you don't have much diversity across your learning experiences otherwise, yeah. Okay. Anything else? All right, we're all done then. Thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to meeting you properly at some stage across the course of your studies. Okay. Thank you.